My parents abandoned me at 12 claiming poverty. But when I found their Europe travel blog with my sister, I built an empire and now they're begging for my money. I'm 24 years old. I work in finance and founded my own nonprofit organization that helps young adults with financial literacy. And honestly, I never thought I'd get here. Not after what happened when I was 12. I guess I should tell this story from the beginning because there are a lot of people who ask me how I got to where I am, and the honest answer is that I got here in spite of my parents, not because of them. I know that sounds harsh, but by the time you finish reading this, you're going to understand why. When I was a kid, like up until I was 11, I thought I had a normal family. My dad, William, worked in sales, my mom, Rachel, was an elementary school teacher, and I had a younger sister, Madison, who was like 8 years old at the time. We lived in a decent house in the suburbs, nothing fancy but not bad either, normal middle class. Madison and I got along most of the time, though she was always the favorite. I noticed that from a young age, but I never gave it much importance, because that's just how things are with younger kids, right? My parents were always a bit distant with me, let's say. They weren't abusive or anything, but we also weren't one of those super close families you see in movies. With Madison, it was different. They literally lit up when she walked into the room. But I thought it was just me, that maybe I was exaggerating or being jealous. Everything changed when I was 12. It was in June. I remember it perfectly, because I had just finished 6th grade and was excited about summer vacation. My parents sat me down at the kitchen table. They both looked super serious, and I honestly thought someone had died or something because I had never seen them with those faces. My father was the one who spoke first. He said, "Samuel, we need to talk to you about something important," and I just stood there waiting for them to drop the bomb. What they said was basically that they were going through very serious financial problems, that they had lost a lot of money and couldn't keep supporting me, that they were going to have to place me in temporary foster care until things got better. I remember sitting there not really understanding what they were saying, like my brain wasn't processing the words, and when I finally asked, "But what about Madison?" my mother told me they were going to keep her because she was younger and needed more care. It doesn't even make sense when I think about it now. You know what I mean? Like an 8-year-old kid would need less money than a 1-2-year-old, but at the time I was a child and could only think that I had done something wrong, that somehow this was my fault. 2 weeks later, I was packing my things into 2 suitcases. That was all I could take, and my parents drove me to the White's house, who were my temporary foster parents. The whole situation was super strange and traumatic. Like my mother cried a little when she said goodbye, but in a way that felt fake. I don't know how to explain it. And my father basically gave me a squeeze on the shoulder and said to behave myself. Madison wasn't even there. They said she had stayed with a friend so it wouldn't be so hard for her, which basically meant they didn't want her to see them throwing me out of the house. The Whites were an older couple, like 55 years old, both of them, and they seemed like good people, but I was devastated. I literally spent the first week crying in my new room, wondering what I had done to deserve this. They were super patient with me. They gave me my space, but also tried to make me feel welcome. Normal things that parents do, but that felt weird coming from strangers. About 3 or 4 months passed and my biological parents practically disappeared. At first they called me every 2 weeks, super awkward 10-minute conversations where they asked me how I was and I said fine, even though I wasn't fine at all. And then the calls got more and more, spaced out until they basically stopped calling. The Whites told me this was temporary, that my parents were working on resolving their financial problems, but something didn't add up because if they had so many money problems, why was Madison still in ballet classes and on the soccer team? I saw her photos on Facebook. Yeah, at 12, I already had Facebook even though I shouldn't have, and my sister looked happy in all the photos, with new clothes and doing extracurricular activities that definitely weren't cheap. The truth came to light about 6 months after they left me with the Whites, and when I say it came to light, it was literally by accident because I was doing what any curious kid would do, searching for my parents online to see if I could find any clue about what was happening. I found a travel blog, one of those fancy Instagram-type blogs with professional photos and long descriptions about cultural experiences and all that shit, and when I started looking at the photos, almost threw up. It was my parents, William and Rachel, with Madison, in Europe. There were photos of them in Paris in front of the Eiffel Tower, in Rome at the Colosseum, in Barcelona at the Sagrada Familia. All the photos taken during the last few months, exactly the time I had been in foster care. The blog descriptions talked about how they had decided to sell everything and travel the world with their daughter to give her a broader education and experiences that the traditional school system couldn't offer. They didn't mention they had another child. Not once in the entire blog. It was like I had never existed. I sat there in front of the computer in the White's library for hours, reading that blog, looking at photo after photo of my family, my ex-family, I guess, living this dream life while I was in a strange house, feeling abandoned and confused. There were photos of them eating at expensive restaurants, staying in nice hotels, buying Madison designer clothes in European stores, and in each description they talked about the freedom and joy of living without ties. Ties. Can you believe it? I was a tie for them, a weight they needed to free themselves from so they could live their best life with their favorite daughter, Mrs. White found me crying in front of the computer, and when I showed her the blog, I saw how her face changed from confusion to horror and then to a fury I had never seen in her before. She called my social worker immediately and showed her the blog, and that's when the whole system started moving to investigate what the hell was really going on. Turns out my parents never had financial problems. Well, not the kind that makes you so poor you can't support your kids. What they did have was a bunch of credit card debt and some minor legal problems related to insurance fraud or something. I don't remember all the details because I was a kid and nobody explained everything to me completely, but basically they had decided that the best way to escape their problems was to sell the house, liquidate everything, and get out of the country for a while until things calmed down. The problem was that traveling with two kids is expensive and complicated, especially when you're trying to keep a low profile for legal reasons, so they decided they would only take Madison because she was their favorite and because technically it was easier to homeschool an 8-year-old girl than a 2-year-old boy. The social worker found a letter that my parents had written to the Whites, explaining the real situation. A letter that supposedly the Whites should have received, but that somehow had gotten lost in the mail or something. And in that letter, they basically admitted they didn't plan to come back for me in the near future, that they hoped the Whites could eventually adopt me, or that I would age out of the system. When I found out about all this, I was 13. I had already been with the Whites for over a year, and honestly, I don't know how to process that information, even now as an adult. My parents had abandoned me, not out of necessity, but out of convenience, because I didn't fit into their vision of the perfect life they wanted to live. The Whites asked me if I wanted to try to contact my parents or start some legal process to force them to come back, but I told them no, that if they didn't want me, then I didn't want them either. The Whites started the formal adoption process shortly after, and although it took a couple of years because of all the paperwork and bureaucracy, they finally officially adopted me when I was 15. By then, I was already calling them Mom and Dad naturally, not because they asked me to, but because it really felt that way. They were my real family in the way that William and Rachel never were. The rest of my adolescence was complicated. I went to therapy twice a week to work on abandonment issues and all that shit. And I'm not gonna lie, there were dark moments where I thought I was never going to be okay. That I would always carry this feeling of not being enough. But the Whites never gave up on me. They never made me feel like I was a burden or that they regretted taking me in. They supported me in everything, came to all my basketball games even though I was terrible, helped me with math homework even when it meant spending hours explaining the same concept to me over and over, and basically showed me what it really means to be a parent. At school, I was the weird kid with the dramatic story. Everyone knew my parents had abandoned me because in a small town, it's impossible to keep those secrets. But I was lucky to have a best friend, Cameron, who treated me like I was a normal person and not a charity case or a pity project. When I was 16, something happened that changed everything. I won a full scholarship to college. One of those super competitive scholarships that covers tuition, housing, food, everything, and it was for a prestigious private university. It was huge for me, like probably the best day of my life up to that point, and the Whites organized a special dinner to celebrate. I posted about the scholarship on my social media. Just a simple post saying I was grateful and excited. And literally 2 days later, I received a message from my biological mother, Rachel. The message was super fake and manipulative. Basically said she had seen my post about the scholarship, that she was very proud of me, that she and my father had been thinking about me all these years and would love to reconnect. I deleted the message without responding, but more messages kept coming, first from my mother, then from my father, all with the same tone of, "We're so proud. We've been following your life. We want to be part of your success." It was obvious what they really wanted. They could smell success and thought they could come back into my life and benefit somehow. I graduated from high school when I was 17, almost 18, and it was a big ceremony in the school gym with all the families present. The Whites were there in the front row. Mrs. White recording everything with his old camera that barely worked. And I was happy, genuinely happy for the first time in a long time. When it was my turn to go up on stage to receive my diploma, I heard someone yell my name from the back of the gym, and when I looked, I saw William and Rachel standing there with a sign that said, "We're proud of you, Samuel." They didn't have permission to be there. Nobody had invited them, but somehow they had found out when and where my graduation was and decided to show up to play Parents of the Year. After the ceremony, they tried to approach me, my mother crying and saying she was so sorry, that they had made a mistake, that they wanted to be part of my life again, but Mr. White literally stood between them and me and told them to leave or he would call security. It was the first and last time I saw Mr. White really angry, and I think that was the last time I saw my biological parents in person too. The next few years were a roller coaster. I went to college with my full scholarship, studied finance, because, after all, my experience with my parents and their money problems, I became obsessed with understanding how money really works and how people can ruin their lives through bad financial decisions. I did very well academically, graduated with honors, got an internship at a major investment firm, and basically started building the life I wanted to have. During all this time, my biological parents kept trying to contact me, sometimes directly with emails or messages, other times through distant relatives I didn't even know, all with the same message of, "We want to reconnect. We're your family. You deserve to know the truth about what happened." I never responded even once. I blocked them on every platform I could, but they always found new ways to reach me. Madison, my sister, contacted me when I was 21, and she was like 17. She had found my information through social media and sent me a long message explaining that she had just learned the whole truth about what our parents had done to me. Apparently, they had told her for years that I had chosen to leave, that I didn't want to be part of the family, and that I was the one who had refused to keep in touch. When she finally was old enough to search for the truth on her own, she found the travel blog, the court records, about my adoption, everything, and basically realized that our parents were manipulative liars. She told me she was sorry, that she didn't know, that if she had known she would have done something, though I don't know what an 8-year-old girl could have done honestly. I believed her because her pain sounded genuine, and we started rebuilding our relationship slowly, talking by text messages first and then by video calls, and eventually we saw each other in person when she turned 18 and could travel on her own. Everything exploded again when I was 22 and had just launched my nonprofit organization. The organization is called Financial Foundations. I created it to help young adults, especially those who come from dysfunctional families or the foster care system, learn basic financial skills that nobody teaches them in school. We got some media coverage because my life story was interesting to journalists. Like boy abandoned by his parents becomes successful financial advisor who helps others, that kind of inspirational narrative that people like. My biological parents saw that coverage and sent me an email. But this time the tone was completely different. They said their travel blog had failed years ago, that they had lost all their money, that they were living in a small apartment and struggling to make ends meet, and that as their son, I had a moral and legal obligation to help them financially. The audacity of that email still surprises me. Like, did they really think I was going to give them money after everything they did to me? I ignored the email, but more kept coming, each one more desperate and aggressive. They started contacting people in my professional network, including my bosses and colleagues, telling them their version of the story, where I was the ungrateful son who had abandoned his loving parents, who had only gone through hard times. Some of my colleagues asked me about this, and I had to explain the real situation, which was humiliating and frustrating because these are private things I shouldn't have to share in my workplace. My biological mother even threatened legal action, saying there were laws that forced adult children to take care of their elderly parents, which is technically true in some states, but didn't apply in my case for multiple reasons, mainly because they had voluntarily terminated their relationship with me when they abandoned me. I consulted with a lawyer just to be sure, and he confirmed that they had no legal case against me, that they were basically bluffing to try to manipulate me. Things got really interesting when I was 23, and an independent documentarian became interested in my story. He had seen an article about my organization and wanted to make a mini documentary about my life and how I had overcome my past to create something positive. I was hesitant at first because I don't like being the center of attention, and honestly, my story is painful to tell. But he convinced me by telling me it could inspire other young people who are going through similar situations. I agreed to participate on the condition that we would have editorial control over how my story was presented, and the documentarian agreed. We spent months filming, including interviews with the Whites, with Madison, with Cameron, my best friend, even with my childhood social worker who still remembered my case. The documentarian also did his own research on my biological parents and found things I didn't know, like they had a long history of financial fraud and had scammed several creditors before leaving the country, and that technically they still had some outstanding debts and court orders against them. The documentary premiered at a small film festival and then was uploaded to YouTube, where it went viral, accumulating millions of views in a few weeks. The response was overwhelmingly positive. A lot of people sent me messages of support, saying my story had inspired them, or that they had gone through something similar. But there were also unexpected consequences. My biological parents saw the documentary, obviously, and their response was a mix of fury and indignation. They sent me threatening letters talking about defamation lawsuits, even though everything in the documentary was documented truth, and they started making their own videos on social media, telling their version of the story where they were the victims and I was the villain who had abandoned them and publicly defamed them. Their videos didn't go viral because the truth was already out there in NS. The documentary with evidence and testimonies from multiple people, but it was enough to cause some drama on the internet for a while. Madison was incredible during all this. She publicly supported me and cut contact with our biological parents completely. She told me she had tried to maintain a relationship with them for years after finding out the truth, hoping they could change or at least admit what they had done wrong, but that she finally realized they were fundamentally selfish and manipulative people who were never going to change. She was in college at the time studying psychology, and she told me she had chosen that career partly because she wanted to understand why our parents did what they did, but that now she realized some people are just like that, and there's no explanation that makes it better. The Whites have always been my rock through all this. They never judged, never pressured, just were there supporting me in every decision I made. Now I'm 24, and my organization is growing more than I ever imagined. We just got a major grant that will allow us to expand to 3 more cities. We have a team of 10 people working full-time, and we've helped more than 1,000 young adults in the last 2 years. I also just bought my first home. Nothing huge, but it's mine, and I paid for it with my own money that I earned honestly. And when I signed the papers for the house, the only ones there with me were Mom and Dad, White, Madison, and Cameron. We had a small celebration that night, just the 5 of us eating pizza and drinking cheap champagne. And it was perfect because those are the only people who really matter in my life. My biological parents still try to contact me occasionally, now through fake social media accounts because I have them blocked everywhere, but it doesn't affect me like it used to. I see them as strangers who share my DNA, but nothing else. They have no emotional power over me because I built my own family with people who chose me and who I chose too. Sometimes I wonder how things would have been if they hadn't abandoned me, if I would have gotten to where I am now, or if I would still be trapped in their toxic cycle of debt and bad decisions. And honestly, I think their abandonment was the best thing that could have happened to me, even though it sounds weird to say that. Last week, Madison came to visit me and we were talking about our parents, something we don't do very often because it's painful for both of us, though in different ways. She told me that sometimes she feels guilty for having been the favorite, for having had those years traveling the world with them while I was suffering, and I told her it wasn't her fault, that she was a child and didn't make those decisions. I asked her if she ever thought about reconnecting with them when she's older, and she said, no. That they had had years to try to make things right and never did. That it was always about what they needed, and never about what we needed. And that's enough for me, knowing that my sister understands who they really are and that she chose to be on my side. I don't know what's going to happen in the future with my biological parents. They'll probably keep showing up from time to time, trying to manipulate me or ask me for things, but I don't care anymore. I built a good life without them, a life that has meaning and purpose, and I'm surrounded by people who really love and support me. The Whites taught me that family isn't about blood, but about who shows up for you when you need it most. And that's a lesson I carry with me every day in my work, helping other young people who are going through similar situations. If there's anything good that came out of all this, it's that now I can use my experience to help others, to show them that it's possible to overcome abandonment and betrayal and build something beautiful on the other side of all that pain. And that, more than anything else, makes me feel like it was worth going through. Everything I went through.